Hi, everybody. Hey, why don't you check out my screen here? I want you to check out this project that is kind of interesting. So if you've done any of our official sample applications before, this Friendly Eats app should look pretty familiar to you. This is a basic sort of restaurant review app where you can go and check out various restaurants. But what you probably haven't seen before is this little heart icon here on the top. I'm going to click on it. And you'll notice basically what we're showing is a list of your favorite restaurants. And what's kind of interesting here about this is, I can go in and actually, let me go and sort of remove one. And then we'll sort of go back and hey, this is refreshed and that's kind of neat. Let me go add in, I'm going to go add in Spot. Oh, that's already in my favorites. Let me go add Eating Best. The 3-star deli in Tulsa. All right, I'm going to add that. And if we go back and review our favorite restaurants again, it should now be there. Look at that, okay? So you might be like, okay, well, this doesn't look very special. But what's actually interesting about this is I'm not doing this in sort of a native NoSQL-y way. There is no NoSQL query on Cloud Firestore, which is what's powering this app in the background, that allows me to grab a list of the user's favorite restaurants. What's actually happening behind the scenes is I'm essentially running a Cloud function that's performing kind of a SQL-like join on this list of restaurants. It's going out onto the database, grabbing my user, finding that user's list, which is just an array of favorite restaurants, and then grabbing all these restaurant documents and putting them all together, and then returning it to my client, kind of like you would see in sort of a SQL database. And so there's some various advantages and disadvantages, and some specific times you would want to do this kind of scenario, and we'll sort of talk about those over the course of the next few videos. So if you're interested in following along, why don't you go grab your favorite text editor, and we will start this episode of Firebase Semi-live. I'm going to clear this out. This is my sample, and we are going to start sort of fresh. As you noticed, I was creating this through the web. I'm doing the web version of Friendly Eats. But well, I guess we'll start with a couple of disclaimers. Because, what better way to start recording than with disclaimers, huh? This video is already getting super exciting. So I'm doing this on the web because this is basically something any of us can do, right? Like sort of the barrier to entry for developing on the web is really low. Don't need a whole lot of special tools or developer accounts or anything like that. But I am not really a web developer, right? Like the last time I did any serious web development, I think we were all still like doing all of our layouts with like fancy nested tables. And it was glorious. Nested table is fantastic. I don't know why you all changed. So, like if you are a seasoned web developer, first, I apologize in advance if I'm doing anything dumb, if I'm using vars when I should be using lets or that sort of thing, or, for eaches when I should be using maps. And, if you notice I'm doing something that's probably not optimal, go ahead and tell me nicely in the credits, and I'll go ahead and fix that. And if you are not a web developer, if you are coming here from like Android or iOS land, don't stress, right? Like, as I just told you, I am not much of a web developer either. And so I'll explain anything that might seem weird or unusual or, is sort of idiomatic to the web as best as I can. But, if you are just sort of a halfway decent programmer in like Swift or Kotlin or Java, you should be able to follow along just fine. So with all those fun disclaimers out of the way, let's get like a sample up and running. I'm going to start by just sort of creating the vanilla Friendly Eats restaurant review app. And I will do that. Let's go over to Firebase and firebaseschool.com. And we'll go find it in the samples. Where are our samples? You know what? I'm going to go search for Firebase Samples. Thanks, Google. Here we go. And over here, Cloud Firestore, we're going to go open this up in GitHub. And this here is our Quick Start JS. And you'll notice this actually has several different sample apps included in here. We got one for auth, one for database, one for Firestore, functions, messaging, so on. The Firestore one is the one I'm interested in. So here, let's open that in a new tab. And we're going to follow along with the directions. Huh? Again, super exciting video. First, let's create a project in the Firebase console so that we can, I'm going to create a brand new one. I'm going to create add project because, this is a semi-live. This is an exciting new thing that I'm doing. We should create a new project for it. Let's call it semi-live cloud function. All right. Uh-oh. I'm 3 projects away from the project limit. Good to know. But for now, I'm going to create a new one. By the way, if you are at your project limit, you could probably attach this to an existing project as long as you don't already have like, a database or something set up. I sometimes do that. Here, Semi-live, Cloud Functions. Great. We're not really using Google Analytics, but I'm just going to keep it enabled anyway, just in case on some future version I want to use analytics. If you do say, hey, I want to have analytics on my project, you do have to sort of pick or create a new analytics account. You can think of an account here as like sort of a folder of analytics apps that all kind of get grouped together. I have one set up for my test app, so I'm just going to use that. And then we're going to wait while it creates our project for us. All right, so our project is ready. Hooray. And I don't know if this is really necessary, but I'm just going to go ahead and register our app. We're going to call it Friendly Eats Web. And this is kind of optional. I'm going to go ahead and just, we'll set up Firebase hosting as long as we're doing it. Most of this stuff we're going to sort of be running locally. So this may or may not matter, but I'm just going to go ahead and do it so that if we need it later, we got it. This is telling us, hey, make sure this stuff's copied into your body tag before you use Firebase services. The sample app that we are running already has this stuff, so don't worry about it. By the way, if you are coming here from like an Android or iOS background and you're like, hey, where's like the, plist file or the, whatever configuration file I need to download? This line here, this basically kind of grabs that already for us. I'll show you, but I think probably if you're sort of hosting or serving anything through Firebase, it kind of automatically creates this little init.js for us that basically contains the constants you need, which is nice. It's reminding us to install the Firebase CLI. And this is important, actually. This is important because we've made a number of improvements to the Firebase emulators over the last couple months. And we've actually iterated pretty quickly on that. And I noticed there were things that I was doing when I was sort of trying this out the first time that didn't work, that got fixed, like a couple of days later when they upgraded the tools. Let's see what version of the Firebase tools I have right now. 7.7.0. As long as we're here, let's just go ahead and do this anyway. Make sure that we have the latest version of the Firebase tools. I actually might get an error because it's going to tell me I need to sudo. Yeah. Hopefully you don't have this situation. Every once in a while, I need to do this. Hi, everybody. Todd interrupting my screencast really quickly just to let you know, don't do what I'm about to do, which is call sudo npm install. It's actually a really bad idea from a security perspective. It makes it way easier for a malicious script to like completely pwn your machine. Do people still say pwn? I don't know. Completely take over your machine. Instead, what I would recommend doing is open up your favorite web search site and do a search for like e-access npm. That's that error that we're getting. And you should get right to the docs.npmjs page, which tells you exactly what to do when you get these errors instead of calling sudo, which is what I was about to do, which is a bad idea. For me, it turns out that this second option worked for me, which was basically creating a new directory off of my home directory, telling npm, hey, use this for any global libraries that you need to install, exporting that to my path. And then when I go ahead and install npm install-g Firebase tools, it'll just go ahead and work and install it locally. Let's make sure that actually works so you can believe me. All right, look at that. Which Firebase, not vase, Firebase, and Firebase -- version. All right, so I've got the latest version of the Firebase tools up and running off of my local directory, and I didn't need to call sudo to run it. So this is what you should do if you run into that same error that I did. Just ignore that whole sudo thing. Okay, back to our original screencast. I should also point out, you'll notice I was using this tool called npm. Again, if you're a web developer, you probably have this and you know what I'm talking about. Even if you're not a web developer, there's probably a chance you have this somewhere installed on your machine already. But in case you don't, npm stands for Node Package Manager. And if you were to go over to nodejs.org, if you install Node, which is, basically a, well, you can see it's a JavaScript runtime. If you were to install this, this comes with a thing called Node Package Manager, which is what you would be using to install something like the Firebase tools. If you've never run into this before, grab the LTS version. That is the stable version, and that should have, I actually don't need that, but that should have sort of the latest version of Node as well as Node Package Manager. And so in fact, yeah, you can see I've got Node Package Manager 6.12 running. There's an upgrade to 6.13. Go ahead and upgrade to the latest version of that. That's probably not as critical as having the latest version of Firebase tools. So let me just, again, let's see what version of Firebase I have. All right, 7.7.0. So hopefully that's what you have by the time you have something like that, or later by the time you're following along with this video. Alrighty, anyway, all that I'm going to say next, and we will skip this for now because we are not deploying to Firebase hosting right away. So let's go back and follow the rest of these instructions here. Friendly Eats uses something called anonymous authentication. Basically, you can kind of think of this as like sort of local, is it cookie-based? It might be cookie-based authentication, where basically we don't have you, create like a sign-in, username, password, login with Google, anything like that. But we kind of remember who you are so that if you were to close your browser window and come back later, we'd at least sort of be like, oh, hey, let's continue where you left off. This doesn't let you sort of jump from one browser to another, from one machine to another, but it's sort of a nice lightweight way of authenticating users, but we do have to make sure that that is enabled in our project. So we're gonna do that. We're gonna jump over to authentication, under sign-in methods. By default, all sign-in methods are disabled unless you go ahead and explicitly enable them, and I'm gonna go ahead and explicitly enable this one. I will hit save. And we're good. It's now enabled. Let's see what's next on our instructions. All right, we need to enable Cloud Firestore. So I'm going to go ahead over to the database panel. And I'm going to say create database. And I think it asks me to start in test mode, which, as we've probably mentioned several times, is a really bad idea if you're, like exposing your database to the world, because we're basically allowing anybody to read or write to this database as long as the date is sometime before December 18th. Obviously, this is sort of something you should do temporarily while you are developing your database. Don't leave it like this when you launch, because people can do all sorts of nasty things to it. So I'm going to say next. And I'm going to select my location for Cloud Firestore, where I want this to be located. Please note that you cannot change this once you've set it. So, we're doing a little test app. Doesn't really matter too much. For your production app, do make sure you've given some time and thought as to where you want your data to be located. You also have your choices between multi-region, which means you basically sort of have like 3 data centers a few hundred miles apart from each other that all kind of replicate data back and forth for maximum reliability, or regional, which are more like kind of single region data centers, which are also reliable, just not like, super duper reliable. But, the flip side is these happen to be usually about half as expensive. In our case, again, doesn't really matter too much. This does not need to be super duper reliable, but I also, since highly doubt we're going to go over the free quota for anything, so I'm just going to stay with my default, which is US Central. Go ahead and pick a location that's kind of close to you. Multi-regional or single region, doesn't matter too much. I'm going to say done. And it is now going to set up Cloud Firestore in my location. We'll wait for that. While that's happening, let's see what else is going on here. Copy and download this repo. Oh, that's a good one. Oh, wait. Let's do that. All right, well, that's still setting up. Hopefully. We're going to go ahead and download this repository. Now you'll notice, by the way, I can't sort of, as far as I can tell, I can't just clone this. I got to go to sort of the parent quick start JS repository, which means I'm going to have a bunch of folders that I'm not going to care about, but that's OK. Let me copy this, and then I will open up terminal in a decent directory. Let me make a directory called Semi-live. I'll probably need to rename this if I do more than one of these videos, but and then let's do a git clone, and we'll paste in what we had earlier and let that go. Oh, that was fast. got good internet here at Google. Let's see, go into the quick start directory and go into Firestore. All right, and there's our project in all its glory. Let's see what's next in our instructions. We'll make sure, all right, looks like our database is set up and it's empty. Nice. And under our instructions, all right, so we've already done this. We've npm installed Firebase tools. And so now we're going to say Firebase use -- add. And basically what this kind of does is it lets Firebase know that this directory that we're using is associated sort of with a project. So that, later on when we say Firebase Deploy or Firebase, whatever, serve, it kind of already knows based on sort of the directory we're in, what project this is supposed to be with. You should make sure, by the way, is it Firebase sign in or is it Firebase login? I think it's Firebase login. All right, make sure that you're logged in. It will probably ask you that. And make sure this is the same account as you have used for creating your Firebase project. In my case, it is. And then I'm going to say Firebase project add, like it told me to. Oh, sorry, Firebase use. See, semi-live, you get to see me make mistakes. Lots of them. And it's going to ask, well, all right, what project do you want to basically sort of associate with this directory? I'm going to go ahead and select Semi-live Cloud Functions. We'll call it Semi-live. I don't know when it ever uses this alias, but it always asks me for it. And now we will say Firebase Deploy, only Firestore. And what this will do is this will basically deploy any local functions that are set up to configure Cloud Firestore. Actually, before I do that, let me just show you. I think basically this would be, where are my rules? There we are. This would be like Firestore rules, which you can see are sort of some more advanced security rules than the ones I have that are just like, hey, let's open up the world to everything. And then I think indexes. This basically tells Firestore to go ahead and create a few sort of indexes, custom indexes on sort of multiple, I believe these are sort of multiple fields at once. I talk about this in a Get to Know Cloud Firestore. Go ahead and watch that if you want to. But this sample app does make use of sort of querying multiple fields at the same time. And in order to do that, you need to sort of have these indexes set up and running. And so basically when I say Firebase Deploy, only Firestore, what it's going to do here is deploy those rules as well as those indexes. And then my database should be up and running. All right, then the last thing I'm going to do is call Firebase serve. And this is going to basically take all of my local index.html files and serve them locally. So I'm not deploying to Firebase hosting. I'm basically just going ahead and sort of running these locally. So if I were to go ahead and open up localhost port 5000, you'll see I've got friendly eats here. And it's telling me I have no data, which makes sense because this is sort of a brand new database. So I'm going to click this button that says Add Mock Data. And after a little bit, hopefully if everything goes well, I get a whole bunch of fake restaurants. Hooray! I don't know, let me click on one of these. The other neat thing it'll do is if you're really interested in sort of seeing what like a real kind of filled out database would look like, you go ahead and mock ratings for some of these restaurants. And there we go. We got a few randomly generated ratings, but I don't care too much because we're actually not going to get into ratings for the purpose of this Firecast. Alrighty. So with that, we now have our sample app up and running. So that's great. Oh, and by the way, if you're interested, let's see if I can show you. Let me, All right, you know what? Let's open up this project now in Visual Studio Code. Go ahead and use your own favorite editor for developing on the web. VS Code is what I have, but there are others out there and they are all equally great, except Emacs, you Emacs people. Let's open up the folder, Semi-live, quick start, Firestore. We'll open up that whole folder. There we go. All right, so yay, here's our index.html. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to head on over to the console, or head on over to the Chrome, and I'm going to open up the Firebase console. The Chrome developer console. This is Command Option J. If you've never done this before, if you haven't done a lot of web development, you end up doing a lot of like kind of debugging / messing around / figuring out what's going on / sort of, I don't know, hacky programming using the console. It's great. I recommend you sort of become friends with it. I'm just going to check out here. Let's see, Firebase init.js. So this is the thing I was talking about that actually goes ahead and modifies or basically delivers our project, values for us. Can I open this? Will that work? Oh yeah, there you go. So you can basically kind of see this is what it is. This looks an awful lot like the plist file if you're coming from iOS development or whatever the equivalent of a plist file is for Android. You can just see that basically this kind of gets added for us automatically by Firebase, and it's really neat and helpful. So just in case you were wondering, that's that neat little thing. Alrighty, so let's see here. I think we're pretty much at a good stopping point. Let me just kind of run you through where we're at right now, and then we'll go ahead and kind of pick it up in the next video. So we've gotten our official sample app up and running. Hooray! And maybe you can go ahead and watch this video if you're not interested in any of this, but you just want to see how to get the sample app up and running. Over here, you can kind of see I have my restaurants collection. And in here, I've got, information about all these various restaurants, which is fantastic. And if we up down here, we got like a restaurant with some ratings, and in here are sort of all the individual reviews, and that's great. But what we haven't done yet is we don't have like a users collection. And if we're going to be creating a function in our app that lets a user sort of store favorites and come back and view those later, well, we don't have that here. So I think probably what we'll do is in our next segment, we'll go ahead and start creating a user collection where we can store some information about the user, use that as a place where we'll eventually store their favorite restaurants, and then kind of talk about the various ways of setting up our database and why we are going to end up using a cloud function instead of, say, some denormalized data or doing something in a more NoSQL-y way. Hooray, you gotten the sample app up and running, and hopefully fairly soon we'll see the next part of this video where we can actually start making some modifications to it. So I will see you next time.